Our first reader is Mr. Dustin Monk. He's a graduate of the Clarion Writers Workshop, as am I. His work is forthcoming from or has appeared in Bull Spec, Shimmer, Digital Science Fiction, and Prime Mincer Literary Journal, among others. On his blog, spiralzine.blogspot.com, he began documenting the adventures of the club-hopping, gin-guzzling orb weaver that had made his home outside Dustin's kitchen window, but they had a falling out. Dustin doesn't want to get into details, but if you bought him a sour ale, he might be obliged to divulge one or two juicy bits. Please welcome Dustin Monk.
Thanks. All right. So I'm reading a story called Anecdote of the Singularity. And it's sort of based off of, sort of very loosely riffing off of Wallace Stevens' Anecdote of the Jar. So if you're familiar with that poem at all, it might help. 1. In which Jerry, with a Y, recites his mantra for remaking the world and gives a much abridged history lesson. In the beginning was the singularity. It was pretty rad. Moving furniture with a thought, toasting bread in the palm of your hand, accessing any book ever published or weapon ever constructed by blinking. Everybody was happy and smart, well-fed, disease-free. There was so much light. Then the singularity, like a bubble, just sort of popped. These things happen. Out-of-touch historians claim it was the upload overload of 2119. Well, what do they know? They're out of touch. Sometimes, Jerry, you don't want to see the whole picture. In the post-singularity, the last of the corporations divvied out lives. You know how that went. Not enough downloads in your cloud bank? Too bad. Believe all you want about natural selection. What it came down to was a lot of dead kids in the street. No one gave a Vibird or Wikibush. Those same out-of-touch historians nicknamed the post-singularity the apocalypse. I suppose they weren't far off on this one. The network winner, all that jazz. Oh, Jerry, come on. Of course, you haven't lived until you've seen rain the color of red lipstick fall from the sky or hugged the barren earth where corn once grew. We went underground then, cities of darkness and rock. Our eyes grew bigger, our skin thinner and more luminescent. There are documented cases where the bones of a person illuminated dark paths in the underground caves. Look it up if you don't believe me. 1,000 years passed. You can say that in one of those announcer-like voices if you want. 1,000 years passed. Then we reached a time of recombinations, of reaugmentation and rejoining, when humans, such as we had become, ceased to be purely blood and artifice and bone. It was like the singularity all over again, Singularity 2.0, though nobody called it that because that sounded ridiculous. As ridiculous as the post-singularity, but that's what it was. Instead, we named it a progression. You see, technology had never left us. We just learned to cope. In this afterlife, the three of us live. I'm Jerry, she's Jerry, and that bit of nanotech hiding behind the stove is the roach. Hear me out. I'd like to remake the world again. 2. In which Jerry, with an I, expresses doubts. You're a bit of an optimist. It's why I fell in love with you. It certainly wasn't your looks. You tried living for 10,000 years. Time is a ravaging bastard. How surgeries be damned. There are a number of reasons, Jerry. Remaking the world is crazy. In no particular order. What's the point? I like this neighborhood the way it is. Our shells will burn to a crisp, our organs churn to butter. Ever heard the phrase, history repeating itself? It'll take dominion everywhere, again. You'll upset the roach. Do you remember when the city council voted to build the interstitial highway? Posters all along this spatial reality said, from this world to this world. In the beginning was the singularity, the biggest collision we've ever known. Can you imagine what happens when we collide again? I love you, Jerry, but not that much. Where is the roach anyway? Has it gone? It's so quiet in the apartment at night. The roach is quieter, an absence of light and sound. It wandered off. I think it went to drown itself in the Illinois River. I drank a lot when I was a child. There wasn't much else to do in Peoria. The riverfront was beautiful. A lot of leftover streamers and fireworks and gorgeous people sort of hanging there in the past. You know how much I miss fireworks. I used to dream of fire on the river, and I thought it was the past. Like during the apocalypse, But it isn't the past, Jerry. It's the future. All the rivers are dried up data flow now. Even so, perhaps especially. 3. In which Mr. R asks a question. During the progression, I got bored hanging on the stove, listening to them duke it out. They'll argue for 10,000 years while the wilderness grows up around them. I went down to the old riverfront to meet my friend, the bumblebee. Have you any honey, Miss Bumble? Well, I'm afraid not, Mr. R. You see, I am a hologram, and my honey is data. Have you any data, Miss Bumble? Oh, Mr. R, I must disappoint you there, too. My data has been corrupted, and the hive has broken apart. Perhaps you've also noticed the awkward way I fly? I have. Well, who is to blame for our awful age? Well, the Singularity, of course. The question was rhetorical. Yes, Miss Bumble buzzed maladroitly. I know. I did not know what else to say, so I said, do you remember what it was like before the progression? Another rhetorical question. Ha ha. Miss Bumble settled on a big green leaf overlooking the Illinois data flow. A fisherman rowing a hollow boat wandered by. Catch some gnatfish, I called to him, but the ethereal wind was too loud. He didn't hear me. Life before the progression, said Miss Bumble, answering a question I'd forgotten I'd asked, was like a waking dream. I collected copper pennies because they were worth more than zinc pennies. I lived in an apartment in a neighborhood in Chicago. It isn't that far from here. What, Chicago? A place, during time. Suddenly, Miss Bumble flew up, zigzagging a useless pattern in the sky, her rear wing flapping sadly. We can go there, maybe. It'll only take a nanosecond. Sounds boring, I said. Anyway, I should see if Jerry and Jerry have remade their world yet. Miss Bumble's antennae bristled. Then I'll be in 2902. It was my favorite year. Hell of a lot of nectar. 4. In which Jerry, with a Y, waxes philosophical and ends with half a story. What happens after the post-singularity? And what happens after that? Science is like religion. It fades, you know. Quantum mechanics, dark energy, the theory of whatever. Forget about it. It doesn't matter. There comes a point when everything we think we know is just a matter of faith or math, a port in air, and grossly overstated. And you can say that in one of those announcer-like voices, too. For instance, if I say, I'm going to remake the world, I imply, by the sheer nature of the statement, that I know enough about the world to remake it. I don't. He doesn't. If you'd said to me, when I first re-augmented into this spatial reality, that it was my lot in life to argue the specifics of world remaking for 6,000 years with the woman I love, I would have said you're crazy. But here we are, in the kitchen, having an honest-to-Prague existential spat. We'll call the next stage a quarreling. I eye the knife in the dish drainer. Obviously, I'm not thinking really about using it. I'm not a psychopath. I'm only noticing its shimmery silver blade and concluding that waving it about just so might help get my point across in a more efficacious manner, if, perhaps, with more drama than might be warranted. Don't think I don't notice you noticing that knife, Jerry. I imagine twisting that blade in your gut. I imagine thousands of your cells dripping off its sharp point onto the kitchen floor. Tell me, how would that remaking feel? Let me tell you a story. In the beginning, when Jerry with a Y first met her, Jerry with an I was working as a claims adjuster for an insurance company. Their first conversation consisted of her telling him how it was her job to determine if the insured on a life policy was alive or dead. I need a death certificate. I don't get the cert by such and such date. Gravy goes to the state. I'm not as cold-hearted as all that. God damn it, Jerry. Anyway, this is my mantra for remaking, Jerry with a Y said. In the beginning was the singularity, and it was rad. It did not give a Vibird or Wikibush. Yeah, okay. Damn it, Jerry, don't you see? We're adjusters. Adjusters eternal. The two of us. I love you. Please, don't leave. 5. In which Jerry with an I responds to the half story and makes a decision. Have you ever dated a bass player? I had to work as a claims adjuster. It pays. Do you know what doesn't pay? That's a rhetorical question. Sincerely, the Roach. You want to remake the world, but first you have to remake yourself. I don't know what else to tell you. Jerry scares me when he sleeps. He tosses and turns so much the bed conforms to his movements. Then the bed seems to overtake him, and I think he's suffocated, drowned in bed sheets. It's very sad and sometimes hilarious. I just can't deal with that kind of predictability anymore. In the morning, I packed the few things I'd brought to the apartment: a toothbrush, some shirts and pants and underwear, salt and pepper shakers, a couple holograms, a red wig. The roach scurries into my ear and laid some eggs, his way of saying goodbye. I leave before Jerry wakes up. The sky is rusty, silver, and red. The sun is a yellow triangle rising over the data hills. I run my hand along the red and brown bricks of our apartment building, and it swells accordingly. Someday, maybe, I say. The inside of my ear scratches and buzzes. The roach's babies are already hatching. Time is so fluid, it screams. I think that one day I might fall in love with Jerry again for the first time, but who can know about these things? Anyway, he's got a lot of growing up to do. The wilderness rises up to meet me and sprawls around my shell and outer limbs. It is no longer wild, and in its gentle stalks, I left this spatial reality. What happens? What happens? 6. In which Mr. R visits the land of nectar. I am round upon the mecha swirl of ground, a minuscule speck, and my eggs are gray, bare, brittle glass nanotech. I should have come sooner, I tell Miss Bumble, but Mama fell down a flight of stairs and Dad drank herself away. You came when you could, she says, her voice thick with nectar. If a bee could shrug, she surely would have. Eventually, Miss Bumble shares the flower's nectar with me. It tastes like tree bark and marrow and sea salt microchip. It is a peculiar sensation, like nothing else in the data flow.